Hello and welcome everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Hinata Joined Akatsuki for Naruto Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
She looked down at the peaceful village below, its residents blissfully unaware of the passage of time or day. She saw the proud gates she had so often passed through on her way to and from missions she had undertaken as a child. The previous Hokage's stone faces, along with the new addition of the fifth, looked down like quiet guardians, keeping constant vigil over all of Konoha. It's as if nothing has changed, she lamented. It must be a homecoming for you, The voice behind her belonged to one of the many psychopaths she had been forced to bear during her confinement. God, this place looks so boring, exclaimed Deidara. She kept her gaze fixed on the village below. After all, what did she expect? This idiot was possibly the only person on the planet who ended every sentence with yeah, and believed that explosions could be considered art. Well, that's true. And its shinobi are far too soft. I'm surprised they've lasted this long, Kasama said calmly. And the other, with his blue skin and shark teeth that made him appear to be anything but human. And his grotesque sword attached to his back that writhed when exposed to bloodshed. Along with this came his sadistic grin, and how he loved to brag about having shaved this and shaved that. She sighed. She had to put up with this stupidity for more than 3 years. Stay quiet, Deidara. The villagers' shinobi are far too persistent. If they discover our presence, it will almost certainly lead to unnecessary conflict. When she was in the presence of her sensei, she felt a burning hatred fill her. He had kidnapped her, used those blasted red soulless eyes to manipulate and torture her. And above all, trained her, but she still hated him for taking her away from her home. She remembered being the shy, timid little Hyuga girl who used to stutter in every sentence 1 minute while on a mission with her comrades. Then lying on the ground, blood pouring from a dozen different wounds, silently praying for her friends to save her. She remembered everything, every moment, every sensation, everyone involved. Her fist clenched, her nails digging into her palm, the pain reminding her of the person who was truly to blame for her agony and isolation. She was aware, however, that her vengeance was near. Listen carefully, Hyuga. Her eyes narrowed at the nickname he gave her. Our brief detour should not attract any unwanted aggressors, nor should you wish to betray us. You owe the Akatsuki enough as it is. She burst out laughing. Owe you. And what exactly do I owe you, Uchiha? That made both Deidara and Kasama cringe. Be assured that I am devoted to the Akatsuki, but as far as I can tell, her hatred activated her Hyuga bloodline limit, giving her eyes a crazed bestial appearance as she turned to face her sensei. I owe you nothing, she snarled angrily. She jumped off the branch and towards her goal. Itachi watched his little protege walk away, frustrated by her disrespect for him. But he found solace in one thing. She was no longer a little girl. She's incredible, Itachi approached his blonde companion slowly, his face contemptuous. What is it, Deidara inquired innocently. Fool, Itachi thought before turning his back on the village he had so long ago abandoned to pursue his own goals. Is it possible that Itachi-san will betray us? Kasama inquired. Itachi considered a reasonable question. It's doubtful, Kasama, but we simply must see where her loyalty lies, he said, looking at his companion and leaping away without looking back. Hey, Kasama-san, Deidara inquired. What exactly is it? Did I say anything to annoy Itachi-san? Kasama fixed his gaze on his companion. Kami, he's an idiot, he laughed. Never mind, Deidara, he said, looking back at the village below, briefly remembering when he and Itachi-san had to flee from being captured. He suppressed the urge to go down, find him, and then smile as he slowly flayed the skin from his bones. His great sword Samehada seemed to agree with him, shivering as it sought to be unleashed and fed. Unfortunately, he had orders. If anything happened to the Hyuga during her brief visit, he and Deidara were to act as either reinforcements, which he doubted she would do with someone of her ability, or alternatively, if the situation swung that way, her assassins. That wouldn't be easy, he thought uncomfortably. She had improved dramatically since the day Itachi had brought them the girl, and now he pitied any poor soul who strayed into her path as an enemy. Hello, Kasama-san. Yeah, what, after all, piqued Itachi's interest in her. He thought it was a mystery when he brought her in. A wounded girl about the age of 13. Not a genius like her rumored prodigy of a cousin, but nonetheless the heir of the feared Hyuga clan of Konoha. I'm not sure, Kasama replied, but I wouldn't go against any intention he may have had for her at the time. Well, whatever, Deidara returned her gaze to the village. She's lovely, Deidara said dreamily. Kisama scowled at his companion before rolling his eyes. Not this again, he told himself. Give it up, she despises you. Deidara gave him a shocked and outraged look. What on earth are you talking about, Kisama groaned. She's just playing hard to get, Deidara laughed. She threatened to castrate you, Kisama said, his brow furrowed. There you have it, Deidara yelled. See what I mean? It's difficult to come by, Kisama felt a migraine coming on as he put his hand to his temple. Worst ever partner, Uzumaki Naruto, 16, grunted as he leapt through the trees, his target visible on the far right and above left in the direction he was heading. He drew 4 kunais from his pouch and threw them at their intended targets at breakneck speed. His aim was accurate, as each blade smashed the center of the enemy's bodies. 2 more of them jumped at him, intending to stop him. Pulling his fist back, he smashed it into the first's face, using the impact to propel himself higher and bring his heel down onto the skull of the second, sending both of his opponents plummeting to the forest floor below. He landed on a tree branch and heard the sharp screech of metal passing through air, which alerted him to a cloud of shuriken aimed at him. So he jumped off the branch and grabbed another from a different tree, twisting slightly to avoid the hail of blades as they cut into the tree he was sheltering behind. I'm taking too long, Databeo, cursed Naruto quietly. Leaping from his position, he saw more of his assailants approach, each armed with a kunai. The first flung his, aiming to strike Naruto's neck, which he only avoided by doing a backflip at the last moment. The kunai scratching a part of his head directly above his Hitai forehead protector, blood trickling down his face. Pulling his elbow back, he struck his attacker in the stomach, winding him, before grabbing his arm and flinging him over his shoulder, using him as a meat shield from further shuriken that the first enemy had thrown after realizing his attack had failed. Leaping from his branch, he slashed the remaining foe across the neck with his kunai and kicked his body over the edge. I'm not going to make it on time, he exclaimed, panicking. Leaping from branch to branch, he saw his goal at the end of the tunnel of foliage and leaves. Finally, he exclaimed triumphantly. Naruto was distracted and didn't notice the kunai thrown at him until it tore into his right shoulder, the same familiar warmth slowly spreading down his arm. He savagely ripped the kunai out, gritting his teeth against the pain, as more of his opponents approached from behind. Damn it, he exclaimed, his teeth clenched. But he knew he couldn't stop fighting them because time was running out. Come on, he exclaimed, full of new vigor that helped him both reach his goal and ignore the sharp pain in his arm. He charged full speed towards his goal, narrowly avoiding fatal injuries from the projectiles his enemies were hurling at him, determined to stop him. He jumped off a branch only to discover explosive tags attached to the bottom of the branch he was about to land on, the leaves obscuring their visibility. He pushed himself with his left leg against a tree, breaking his jump in mid-air, and landing safely on a branch to the right. His pursuers were not so fortunate, as one of them landed on the branch and was engulfed in a fireball as the tags detonated. And Naruto noticed that the explosion had killed the majority of his enemies. Grinning slightly, he returned his gaze to his goal, making one last leap in time, he screamed, as beads of perspiration streamed down his face. He bowed slightly and placed his hands on his lap. 5 minutes and 35 seconds, Naruto-kun, that's 10 seconds faster than your previous record. Naruto smiled triumphantly as he looked at the little girl with the stopwatch. Yes, he roared, raising his fists in the air before quickly lowering them with a quiet "Oh." You're bleeding, Naruto-kun. Hanabi Hyuga, an 11-year-old girl, raised an alarm. Nah, don't worry about it, Hanabi-san, I get hurt all the time. Databeo, he said, wincing slightly and nursing his shoulder with his left hand before smiling broadly. You know you don't have to do all that, especially when your own shadow clones try to kill you, Hanabi said. The only way to train is to put yourself in danger in a deep forest, surrounded by enemies out to kill you. Naruto smiled and gave a thumbs up with his right hand. Kami Naruto-kun, you are without a doubt the craziest shinobi I know. Hanabi laughed, folding her arms. More than just furrowed brows, sensei, Naruto inquired. Easily. Nani? Naruto screamed. That is not right, Databeo. Naruto cried out, thrusting his arms out in front of him, then quickly retracting them. Naruto said quietly, oh, told you. Hanabi grinned as they walked back to the village. See you tomorrow, Naruto-kun, Hanabi said as they passed the Hyuga compound. Later, Naruto said, waving as he returned to town. Naruto-kun, Hanabi screamed. Yeah. A slight turn to look back. Aru-sama says to come at 11 a.m. sharp tomorrow, Hanabi said, a slight smile on her face knowing Naruto is nearly always late to any set timing that her father made. I'll be there on time, Databeo, he said, knowing he'd be late somehow. Okay, bye, Hinabi said with a wave as she entered the compound. Naruto walked back to the village center, needing a medic ninja for his injuries. Bachin is going to kick my butt if I show up to training with injuries again. Databeo? He thought. His injuries were minor, so he went to the only medic nin he seemed to be able to trust with this sort of thing without blowing her top. Ino, hello and welcome to the Yamanaka Flow. Naruto opened the doors of the Yamanaka flower shop, the bell ringing to signal his arrival. With the usual attendant behind the register, Ino paused as she realized who it was and why he was there. Putting a hand to her brow. Not again, she grumbled. Naruto's left hand rubbed the back of his head. Hi Ino. Naruto apologized. Yeah, let's just get this over with, she said, frustrated, before looking at the extent of the damage on his shoulder and slapping him on the back of the head. Do you train to get better or to become a corpse, Baka? Naruto anticipated this and decided it was best to remain silent and sigh. It's a little deep, but I'll see what I can do. Many thanks, Ino. Shut up, Baka. I'm seriously considering charging you for coming in here just so I can heal you. Ino yelled, hitting him over the head again, but flinched as blood poured from his head onto the floor of her family's shop. All right, I'll pay, Naruto said tiredly as he reached for his wallet, but Ino stopped him. This one will leave the house, but the next one will not. Ino warned. Thanks, Naruto said quietly as he slowly removed his jacket and fishnet undershirt to avoid another blow to the head. Ino directed the necessary amount of chakra to her hand while attempting not to blush at the sight of his well-toned body, the obvious result of extensive and strenuous training. Naruto watched as the wound on his shoulder knitted back together as Ino moved on to the cut on the front of his head. Kami, Ino thought, he only ever comes to me because Hokage-sama would kill him if he went to her, and she mused uncomfortably. He refuses to talk to forehead girl. Oh well, perhaps it was for the best. Maybe there are some things better left buried, Ino thought unhappily as she remembered Naruto and Sakura appearing to have some grudge against each other for some unknown reason, both refusing to shed any light on the matter other than it was during the mission. Hokage-sama having rendered the mission specs as an S-rank secret. No one outside Team 7 and the Hokage knew what happened that day. Yash, done, Naruto says with a small smile and a tap on the shoulder. Huh, that's strange. Ino isn't angry anymore, Naruto thought, perplexed. Thank you, Ino, Naruto said, rotating his shoulder to test its fitness. Hello, Naruto. Yes, relax. Don't put any strain on that arm for the rest of today or tomorrow. What? Naruto exclaimed, not wanting to waste even a second of his training. Let alone 2 days if you want to lose your arm. Go ahead and do it. Ino stated with a glare that Naruto would not dare to oppose even if he did release the Kyuubi within him. Okay, thanks again, Ino, he said defeatedly before re-putting his jacket on. Sure, no problem, Ino said absently as she returned to her shop duties, and Naruto left the store without another word. Ino casting one more backward glance. Their entire team seemed to be at odds with each other. I really hope something happens soon to change that, she lamented. Naruto lay down on his bed, his hand behind his head, staring out the window at the stars, his stomach happily full of Ikaraku ramen. Her birthday is in 2 days, he reflected sadly as he recalled past memories that caused him pain and guilt, making a fist with his hand on his chest. I promise, I will find you, Naruto said quietly. Suddenly, he heard the sound of shattered glass near the foot of his bed. Sitting up, he noticed a picture frame had fallen to the ground and drew a kunai from his holster near his pillow for easy reach. Naruto carefully stood up and picked it up to examine the image. His eyes widened as he recalled its origins. Wow, this is really old. Databeo, he thought, a slight grin on his face. It was a picture of the Konoha 12, each with their sensei, back when they were all together and still ranked as genins. Looking back, he realized how stupid he must have looked, dressed in bright orange with a duty that demanded the utmost stealth. Looking around at all the happy faces, he realized how much everyone had changed. Akamaru is sitting on Kiba, not the other way around. Neji is dressed in his old jacket rather than a skirt. Then there are the things that haven't changed at all, like Shikamaru with his chunin jacket, and a comatose expression, fuzzy brows giving a thumb up identical to Gai-sensei, moving his left thumb slightly which was obscuring a face. He felt his stream of joyful memories begin to dissolve. Under his left thumb was Sasuke, as he had appeared during their first chunin exam together, before he had left the village, and he was smiling. One day, Naruto reflected. He noticed that one of the 12 was missing. He saw another face when he moved his right thumb. His most recent broken promise to protect those he cared about. It was Hyuga Hinata's happy face. What made this one so unsettling was that the picture frame had broken, and all of the cracks seemed to point towards her. Moving his finger slightly more, he didn't notice a small piece of glass sticking out and piercing his finger, quickly retracting it. Naruto noticed a small amount of blood seeping down the cracks on the picture and landing on Hinata's picture. During his training with Iro Sannin, he was taught about omens and how they came in all shapes and sizes, some more obvious and easy to miss ... but this was right in front of him. With a small amount of fear, he looked out the window again. This can't be right. She jumped from branch to branch until she found what she was looking for. The burn marks on the trees and the area's devastation could only point to conflict. So he was here ... so that's typical of him, she said softly. Looking down, she noticed something that piqued her interest, so she reached down and touched the mark with the tips of her fingers. She realized it was blood after closer inspection. His bloodline. He hasn't changed at all despite training to the point of severe injury, she noted quietly. She never expected him to, but she had known him since the beginning of their days at the academy. And she also remembered several missions they had together, as well as how he had defeated Kiba and Neji during their first Chunin exams together. She whipped her fingers across a small handkerchief, creating 4 distinct red lines. She then gently placed the prized possession back within her robes. She would always carry a memento of him. She returned her gaze to the Hokage monument. Her friends were unaware that she would soon return. This would be one of those rare occasions if she still smiled. Hyuga Hinata had returned home. His mind was not at ease as he walked through the streets in the early hours of the next morning. He saw the early morning shoppers come in and make their daily purchases. He even saw a few odd genin rush in to get what they needed for the mission they were going on later in the day. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he watched a trio dash from store to store for last-minute ration runs. Good times. Of course, they weren't because Sakura would scream at him for being late, Sasuke would call him a dunce, and the 3 would have to wait another hour for their sensei, who always arrived late with some strange, out-of-place excuse. Feeling his grin fade a little. Yeah, good times. He sighed, but he looked up to see where he was really going. Because Iro Sannin was away researching, there was only one other person he could go see for advice. Hello, Bachin. Naruto yelled as he passed through her door in the Hokage tower. Stop calling me a brat, you jerk. Tsunade roared back, Shizune cowering slightly in the background, fully aware that he was going to ask to go get Sasuke back. She would argue no, and then there would be some long-winded argument in which Naruto would lose and storm off to go do more training. Yeah. Anyway, I need some help, Naruto said, brushing aside the insult and order. Help? Tsunade inquired, surprised, coming from the I can do anything, as long as I work at it ninja, fine. What is it, Naruto? Tsunade inquired. Well, he said, suddenly embarrassed if he had misinterpreted the meaning of something that could have been a simple coincidence. But there was a brief interruption in the form of a knock at the door before he could continue. Hold that thought, Naruto, Tsunade said calmly before looking at the door. Come on in. The knock was delivered by a well-known pink-haired Kanachi. Tsunade-sama, I've finished those reports you requested. Sorry it took so long. Sakura paused mid-sentence as she noticed the room's other occupant before forming a frown and a look of displeasure on her face. Great, she exclaimed angrily. But she wasn't the only one. Naruto's eyes narrowed as they changed from their usual bright and cheerful blue ... to a bloodthirsty, hate-laced red. Damn ... this is going to be ugly. Tsunade thought uneasily, exchanging nervous glances with Shizune, who she could see was thinking similarly. Shizune stepped in at just the right time. Sakura, great timing. Thank you, Shizune said quickly, taking the sack of papers Sakura was carrying, knowing full well that the death stares the two were giving each other could probably melt steel. Aren't you supposed to be at the hospital in 10 minutes? She said evasively, hoping for a miracle to occur. Hi, Sakura said without a trace of interest or anger, before turning to leave with Shizune trailing behind her. Naruto returning to Tsunade, whose eyes narrowed at the obvious sign of Naruto's facial features resembling those of a demon. Tsunade was relieved to see Naruto's eyes and the rest of his face returned to their normal sane appearance as the door finally closed. Well, Bachin, Naruto said calmly, as if no interruption had occurred, slightly surprising Tsunade. When I was training with Iro Sannin, he taught me a little bit about omens, Naruto explained, and Tsunade nodded. But not really enough to recognize one if I see one, Naruto explained slowly. Do you believe you've spotted one? Tsunade expressed her hope that the next answer would not be what she expected. I believe I did. Damn, okay, now slowly tell me what happened that caused you to believe you saw an omen. Tsunade inquired patiently. I was lying in bed looking out the window. Naruto began, recounting last night's events, including how he remembered Hinata's birthday was tomorrow, the falling picture frame, and the blood seeping down the glass. When he was finished, he noticed Tsunade had a glum expression on her face. Tsunade sighed and leaned back slightly in her chair, looking back at Naruto with a foreboding expression. "Bachin?" Naruto inquired, hoping for an answer to allay his fears. "You see, Naruto, omens can come in many forms, but you probably already know this," Tsunade said. "Each person can also have a type of omen which always occurs when a person is correct or mistaken. For example, me in losing at gambling," she finished with a slight grin, but quickly vanished. "The omen you described, on the other hand," she said, staring directly into his eyes, "is among the worst type you." Naruto's stomach clenched uncomfortably. Omens that hurt and involve blood usually mean hatred or rage, or in the worst case scenario, vengeance, she explained before revolving her chair to gaze out the window idly. "But what perplexes me the most about this is how Hinata is involved." Naruto felt she was asking more for herself than for him when she asked, "Do you think it has anything to do with her birthday tomorrow and everything?" Naruto inquired. Tsunade returned the blonde ninja's gaze. "It may very well be," Tsunade said quietly. "But in any case, I want you to be very cautious. You are still a prime target of many of our enemies, particularly the Akatsuki." She felt a twinge of sadness for Naruto as she noticed his hand go unconsciously to his stomach. "I know, Databeo," Naruto stated firmly. "Oh, and on that note," Tsunade smiled. Naruto returned her gaze with a puzzled expression. "I was given a message before you came. It was only 3 words, but I think you'll understand," she said, picking up a small piece of paper from her desk and taking a deep breath dramatically. "You are running late." Naruto's expression changed so quickly that Tsunade couldn't help but laugh. "Crap," Naruto cursed loudly before spinning around and sprinting for the door. "Thank you, Bachin, see you later," Naruto yelled behind him as he shut the door behind him. She looked out the window, still laughing slightly, and saw Naruto run at top speed with dust trailing behind him. Tsunade's expression changed to one of concentration. How could an omen be about Hinata of all people? She wondered, looking back on Naruto's journey. "Look after yourself, brat. You're almost 20 minutes late, Naruto-kun," Hyuga Hayashi said, his eyes narrowed. "Honestly, this boy," he reflected. "I'm sorry, Hyuga-sama," Naruto explained between breaths. Hinabi chuckled as she stood propped next to the door. What a surprise, she thought, but quickly stopped after catching a glance from her father. "But I had to deal with something with Bachin," Naruto began. "Who?" Hayashi stepped in. "Oh, I mean the Hokage," Naruto corrected himself quickly. "Very well, but Naruto, in the future, at least try to arrive on time," Hayashi said, noting that he shouldn't interfere in anything involving Hokage-level importance, but fully aware of what would happen the next time he asked the boy to arrive on time. Sure, no problem, Hyuga-sama," Naruto exclaimed enthusiastically. "Now Naruto, I might as well get to the point of summoning you," Hayashi wisely said before clearing his throat. "First and foremost, I need a message delivered to the daimyo of the fire." Naruto's pupils dilated. "Whoa, Databeo," Naruto said quietly, hoping Hayashi didn't hear him. Looking up, he noticed his brow slightly raised. "Damn him," Naruto thought. "And secondly," Hayashi began, folding his arms and gazing at Naruto with boundless authority and nobility, "I'd like you to tutor my daughter." Naruto and Hinabi both had immediate reactions. "What?" They both looked shocked as they exclaimed. Hayashi gave himself a small grin before proceeding. "It is obvious that Hinabi requires additional training, which I am currently unable to provide," Hayashi explained. "Not to disagree with you, Hyuga-sama, but wouldn't Neji be better for this kind of thing?" Naruto provided. "Perhaps," Hayashi explained, "but as he has attained Jonin rank, my nephew's time is largely served to the Hokage, and the rest of Konoha ... and I also understand that he may begin teaching soon. As a result, I need a temporary personal trainer for Hinabi, and it appears that the most likely candidate for this is you, Naruto," Hayashi said, looking back at the pair. Hinabi's mouth remained open in shock, and Naruto scratched his chin in thought. "Unless, of course, you have any objections. I could alternatively have Hinabi trained at the academy," Hayashi inquired. That seemed to elicit a response. "No problem, thank you Aru-sama," Hinabi blurted out before quickly bowing. "And what about Naruto?" Hayashi said, turning back to Naruto. Naruto shifted his gaze between Hayashi and Hinabi. While her father's face remained as passive as ever, Hinabi's face seemed to scream at him, and he thought he could hear her say something. "Naruto, you loser, say yes." "Okay, I'll do it." Naruto spoke quickly, fearing Hinabi would tear him apart limb by limb if he did not respond. Excellent, Hayashi said with a smile, but he couldn't shake the feeling that his daughter was channeling a titanic killer intent toward Naruto. When should I begin? Naruto spoke nervously. You may begin when you return from your message delivery, Hayashi said, handing him a scroll that Naruto recognized as being on the extremely expensive to-buy side in terms of postage. No problem, Hyuga-sama, Naruto said as he exited the room, giving him a small bow. Hayashi turned and went to his sitting room to read the letters that had been sent to him. Adu-sama, Hinabi stated as she entered the room. Yes, Hayashi stated that he was relaxing on a couch while going through some papers. Pardon me for asking, but, she says, looking out the door before returning her gaze to her father, do you still despise him? Hinabi inquired hesitantly. Hayashi gave her a slow look before placing the letters on a small table and bringing his fingers together. I have never hated the boy, nor do I blame him for Hinata's disappearance, Hayashi said calmly. But why is he practically a Hyuga clan servant? Hinabi inquired. I didn't ask him to do it, he offered himself, Hayashi said calmly. What? Hinabi yelled. When Naruto explained the situation to Hokage-sama and myself, at first I wanted the boy executed, but that would be foolishness on my part. Hayashi sighed. Naruto believed he owed the Hyuga clan his life. Literally, Hayashi paused, and so he offered himself in servitude until I discharged him. But why haven't you let him go? Hinabi inquired. Hayashi gave his daughter the same evaluative look he always seemed to have. I couldn't have asked for a more effective shinobi to aid our clan ... even if he is frequently late, Hayashi said with a small frown. And he also said something else, while looking at a large portrait hung against the wall. Hinabi followed his gaze and examined the image. It was a picture of her father, herself, and Hinata from 2 years ago, with Hinata smiling and standing to her father's left, and Hinabi standing on the right, almost a foot smaller than her. He said he owed her, Hayashi said with a sad tone Hinabi rarely heard. Hinabi's eyes burned and she looked down at the ground. I'm sorry for bothering Adu-sama, Hinabi said quietly. Hayashi returned her gaze. Never apologize for asking questions, Hinabi. You are a Hyuga, we ask so we can learn and thus deal with future events effectively, to protect Konoha and our clan from extinction. He gently said. Hello, Adu-sama, Hinabi said politely before exiting the room. Hayashi returned his gaze to the portrait and marveled at how much her daughter had grown. His gaze shifting to Hinata. I'm curious how much you've grown, Hayashi mused quietly to himself. He always liked getting these types of missions because he could always get around them with minimal effort. No jutsu for Kage Bushin, Naruto stated while making the appropriate hand signs. To his right, a clone appeared instantly. This always seemed to work because the daimyo's mansion is less than 2 miles from Konoha, and with plenty of chakra, a clone could easily get there. He even knew if it was delivered or not because he learned everything his clone does when he gets cancelled. If this is what it's like to be a genius, Databeo, no problem. Naruto laughed before turning to face his clone. Okay, you deliver the message, and I'll take the train, Naruto stated. Okay, his clone said confidently as he dashed towards the mansion at full speed. Now that that was taken care of, he could turn his attention to more pressing matters. But before he could take another step, he was struck by a terrible, mind-numbing stomach pain. I'm hungry, Databeo, he groaned quietly. Okay, ramen first, then training. Looking down from the building on which he was standing, he noticed someone and then grinned. Suddenly, a small plan and prank occurred to me. A prank, he exclaimed excitedly, before scratching his head. That has to be the dumbest thing I've ever thought of, Databeo. Hinabi noticed Naruto fleeing with the scroll. Naruto seemed very excited about delivering that, she thought, unaware that someone was following her. Hanabi-san, a voice from behind her said. Arhhh. Hanabi screamed and spun around, thrusting her hand forward as her clan had taught her. Juken, she screamed, slamming her palm into the chest of her alleged assailant, only realizing too late who was responsible. Naruto felt a stabbing pain in his ribs as the chakra entered him, and he stumbled backwards slightly, attempting to stay on his feet but failing and dropping to one knee. Naruto-kun, Hanabi screamed and ran to his aid. Is everything okay with you? She spoke quickly, terrified that she had almost killed him because her blow was too close to his heart. Naruto coughed, and Hinabi was all too aware that a torrent of blood followed. Naruto-kun, Hinabi was worried now. Hinata had these symptoms before when she fought Neji, and she nearly died due to a lack of medical attention. Naruto's pain was visible on his face as he looked at her. Sin. He mumbled before collapsing to the ground. Then ... his eyes went blank. No, Naruto-kun. Kneeling over his body, she screamed, prior to poofing into smoke. What the hell happened? Hinabi murmured as she gazed at the empty spot where Naruto's body had lain. On the roof to her left, she heard a familiar voice burst out laughing. "I've got you." Looking up, she saw Naruto perched on the edge of the building where the laugh came from, much to her surprise and relief. Dropping down, she noticed, with rage, that he had a triumphant expression on his face. "What was it, Naruto?" Indicating the location of his body. "Oh, just a shadow clone," Naruto said, a large grin on his face. Hinabi's face flushed with shame, and her fist collided with Naruto's arm. "Baka, Naruto, I thought I killed you." Hinabi yelled. "Hey, your father did give me a job after all," he says, raising his hand in an explanation gesture. "What?" Hinabi inquired. "To teach you," Naruto said with a smile. "How is that training going?" Hinabi yelled. His grin faded slightly, and he folded his arms, instead looking at her with the expression her father gave her when he was about to tell her some great virtue of being a shinobi. "Think about it, if I wasn't an ally and an enemy shinobi. The fact that you ran to see if I was dead or alive could endanger yourself or your teammates," Databeo Naruto wisely stated. He smiled at her once more. "And you nearly killed me for whispering your name. For a Hyuga, I thought you'd at least use your Byakugan to see if I was an enemy," Naruto said. Hinabi felt a slimy sense of shame well up inside her. "Aru-sama would be so disappointed," she lamented. Naruto placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, sensing her mood. "But that's why I'm here. Don't worry, I've done a lot worse." Databeo, Naruto laughed. Hinabi gave a small chuckle. "Come on, let's go get some ramen. I'll pay," Naruto exclaimed. "Honestly, Naruto-kun, you like ramen far too much," Hinabi observed. "You don't hear me whining, Databeo." As they made their way to Ikaraku's, he said. They went to one of the many Konoha training grounds after lunch. Hinabi also learned how Naruto was able to deliver the message while remaining in Konoha. When she inquired as to how he had so much chakra, she discovered he had a bloodline limit. Why hadn't anyone told her? A bloodline limit that gives red chakra. Strange, that she thought. As they approached their destination, Naruto motioned for her to come to a halt and stood several feet away, facing her. "Okay, first and foremost, I'm going to assist you in fighting a slew of enemies while also searching for the objective," Naruto declared. Hinabi cocked her brow. Naruto then produced 2 bells and said, "Okay, try to take these from me. So I have to fight you while trying to get the bells, right?" Hinabi inquired. "Yep," Naruto said, attaching the bells to his belt and making a seal with his hands, smirking. "That's it. Tajukage Bushin no Jitsu. Shadow clone," Naruto yelled, and almost 200 clones appeared, encircling Hinabi. Hinabi's pupils constricted as she looked around. "Well, I did say against a slew of foes, didn't I?" Naruto stated. Hinabi regained her composure and performed several hand gestures. "Byakugan," she yelled, her eyes narrowing and the veins on her face visible. She could instantly see everything around her and, more importantly, what the Naruto clones were doing. Several people started cracking their knuckles. "By the way, I'm going all out and may even use the Rasengan if necessary." "Okay," said one of Naruto's. "Naruto-kun, you are aware that you have the ability to kill me, correct?" Hinabi stated that she didn't want to be hit by it after seeing what it was. The Naruto army smiled. "Don't worry, I'll only use it on low power if necessary." "Fine," Hinabi said relievedly as he assumed the Hyuga battle stance. The army prepared for battle. "Ready," said Naruto to her right. "Set," said Naruto to her right. Hinabi clenched her fists. "Go," they all yelled, sprinting towards her. Ino was completely bored out of her mind. Evenings were always the worst, with few customers and everyone she knew either relaxing or on a mission. Shikamaru was doing his duties attending to the Chunin exams with the Sand Kunoichi while Choji was with his family in some restaurant. She couldn't help but scowl when she saw that. "I can't believe those two are dating," she grumbled, especially given how the pair blushed and looked away the last time she asked them. She had an 8th sense for this sort of thing. Her 7th sense was the ability to always ask her teammates for money when she needed it while out shopping. And her 6th sense was her incredible fashion sense. It was something about Temari's sense of superiority that she despised. That, and Shikamaru's act as if she didn't matter anymore, as if Tsunade wasn't so fascinating. She felt a wave of fatigue wash over her, along with a dreadful cold that slowly grew in her ribs. "Well, I'm tired," she said aloud, putting her hand to her brow, while wondering what was wrong with her chest. Strange, given that it's a pleasant 7:30 p.m. The doorbell rang to confirm a visitor. "Hello and welcome to the Yamanaka flower shop," she said automatically, looking around to see who it was, thinking it better not be Naruto again. It turned out to be a girl her age with black hair and casual black shirt and blue trousers, as well as a Konoha jacket indicating her Chunin status. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. Her eyes were to blame. They were a simple brown ... but it was like staring into deep pits with no end in sight, knowing that the end would bring something dark and horrifying. Ino got a shiver down her spine and found it difficult to breathe. The girl continued to stare at her before moving on to a rose section. "Would you like some assistance?" Ino inquired nervously. "Damn shop protocol." "No, thank you," the girl replied, her face emotionless. Ino took a look at the girl. "Okay, this is getting weird," Ino thought. After a few moments, the girl approached the counter carrying a single white rose. "Okay, that's one Konoha spirit rose ... Good choice," Ino said, giving her the price and slowly tapping the appropriate buttons on the cash register, fully aware that her hand was shaking violently, all the while not looking at the girl's face ... At such close-on contact, her eyes would terrify her, and she froze, briefly looking at the girl's face and into her eyes. She froze. Kami ... as it's if she isn't human. Ino feared. Before turning to leave, the girl silently handed her the money. Ino also turned and walked to the back of the store. She desperately needed some fresh air. But before she could leave the room, she heard a voice. "Nice to see you again, Ino-san." Ino spun around, looking in the direction she heard it. There was no one there, and the girl had already left. That voice ... it sounded familiar ... as if she hadn't heard it in years. In shock, her eyes widened and her mouth opened slightly. "It can't be," she muttered as she leaned against the wall. Another customer was confirmed by a tinkle. With a horrified expression, he spun around again and faced the door. She was overjoyed when it turned out to be her friend and teammate, and rumor has it, Konoha's laziest shinobi, Shikamaru Nara. "Hey Ino, Choji wants us to join his family for dinner. Our parents are already there." And Temari decided she wanted to come. Shikamaru said boredly before noticing the look on Ino's face. "What's wrong with you?" he asked in a more focused and anxious tone. "It's usually impossible to keep this troublesome woman quiet," he thought. Ino paused before sprinting up to Shikamaru, wrapping her arms around him and burying her face in his chest. "Whoa, calm down," exclaimed Shikamaru before realizing she was shivering and breathing irregularly. He was worried now because something bad had happened to her. He gently took her arms away from him and looked her in the eyes. "Ino, tell me what happened slowly," Shikamaru said calmly, and Ino began telling her story. Shikamaru's face was filled with surprise when she finished. "It had to be a genjutsu," Shikamaru concluded. "It appears that dinner can wait. We must inform Hokage-sama of this." From behind, the door tinkled. The feeling of dread returned. It was the young lady. "It's her," exclaimed Ino, pointing to her. Shikamaru immediately pulled some shuriken from his holster and threw them, not intending to hit but rather to distract, and then began his hand seals. "Kage main no jutsu," he exclaimed, his shadow instantly reaching for its target. But before it could reach her, it stopped mid-movement before retracting, just as the shuriken that appeared to be suspended in mid-air did to his horror. The girl simply stood there, staring at them with lifeless eyes. What exactly is going on? That's never happened before, Shikamaru thought, going over hundreds of possible explanations for his attacks failing. Ino regained her composure by using a variety of hand signs. "Nimpo, Shinrenshin no Jitsu," she exclaimed, forming a rectangle with her fingers above her heart. However, no effect was observed. The girl spread her fingers and raised her right arm. Shikamaru and Ino were both paralyzed at the same time, as if by some unseen force. The girl then drew her hand back and reached into her pocket, pulling out a piece of paper with a seal that neither of them recognized, and crushed it, creating a fiery glow within her fists. As the girl's image began to fade, as if disoriented or unstable, an odd sound of static filled the room as the person's image slowly faded. The form then changed into a black robe with blood-red clouds and a straw hat to conceal its face. "Akatsuki," Shikamaru pondered. "What do you want?" exclaimed Ino, still unable to move. The Akatsuki gently removed the straw hat with its hand. "Nice to see you again, Shikamaru-kun," she said. The Akatsuki turned to face Ino. "And Ino-san, shinobi should know no fear." "Thank you for the rose ... It is indeed beautiful," she said, pulling the rose from her robes and gently twirling it in her fingers. Both of them felt their eyes widen and air leave their lungs. Shikamaru thought briefly, casting a quick mental jutsu, so that's how she did it, but knew nothing else before the pair collapsed unconscious on the ground. The Akatsuki having her hand out with another seal on the palm. My friends, I cannot have you interfering with my mission, she said quietly before approaching Ino and placing a seal on her back, which gradually faded into her clothes. She would have no recollection or memory of her, so the next day she would be her usual self, watching the unconscious form of Ino rise and slowly begin its walk to her home for rest. She wished she could say the same about Shikamaru, who, having run out of notes, would be left comatose. She sighed as she turned to leave, staring at the Shikamaru. It begins, she said quietly. Deidara sat precariously perched on the end of a large tree branch they had arrived at, simply playing with his clay, carelessly making new shapes and wondering which shape would cause the greatest explosion, having been denied the privilege of testing them for two humble reasons. Damn, it was such a great blast to probably Itachi had something to do with it Deidara sighed. Second, Kasama was sleeping and had promised to flay him if he was awoken by one of his art projects. Deidara looked around angrily at his superior's snoring sleeping form, who was making noises that sounded like a clogged sink attempting to unclog. Kasama-san, Deidara said, moderately loudly. There was no response. Kasama-san, Deidara exclaimed, pausing his clay shaping. Once again, no response. Kisame-san, he yelled, turning around to see if anyone in Konoha had noticed the vein pop on his forehead, before taking a quick look back. Again, no response. What the hell, Deidara asked, scratching his head before turning to look at the mouth on his hand, a small grin on his face. Oh well, he'll probably thank me for this, Deidara said, forming a tiny clay bird in his hand and flying it near Kasama's ear. Kai, he yelled, and the tiny bird exploded with a small pop, which Deidara decided was better than nothing. To say the least, the reaction was not what he had expected. Rather than simply waking up in the midst of a swarm of swearing, Kasama managed to wake up, panic, grab his sword from his back, and logically shave the entire tree and branch the pair had been resting on in a frenzied swing, eventually plummeting to the ground 30 feet below. Deidara landed on solid ground face first, while Kasama avoided the landing by falling on a branch 3 meters off the ground, which came up solidly connecting in between his legs. Deidara swore he would have laughed himself to death if he hadn't been so out of breath. The look of pain, anger, frustration, and insanity on Kasama's face, mixed with a healthy dose of terror and shock, was priceless, Deidara observed as his superior slowly fell to the side and onto the ground. Kasama rolled onto his side and looked at Deidara with disgust. What the hell? Yelled Kasama before wincing and nursing his bruised parts. I had to wake you up Deidara said, coughing and massaging her most likely broken ribs. Why didn't you just wake me up by calling my name or something, you retarded explosive bastard? Exclaimed Kasama, who was now lying in a fetal position. Another vein on Deidara's forehead twitched. Idion, he exclaimed. Kasama reached for his sword before wincing and pulling it back. Deidara, I swear when I can move again, I'm going to flay you, so slowly. Kasama spat. How the hell did Sasori Dono deal with him? Kasama thought irritably. Deidara noticed his superior's expression and the silver lining that had just arrived. Well, Kasama-san, I was trying to wake you up to say that I don't mind handling the mission alone. Deidara chuckled. What? I said you didn't have to come, I can handle this on my own. Kasama was intrigued, he despised playing backup, but, are you aware that this was a mission assigned to us? Kasama inquired. Yeah, I know, but I'm pretty sure I can handle this on my own. And I did beat that San Jinchuriki, didn't I? Deidara said. As a result, he was rescued by Konoha Shinobi, Kasama explained, finally sitting up. That was a fluke, Deidara insisted. Kasama sighed and rolled his eyes. Okay, think about it this way. If the Hyuga betrays us, do you think you can beat her on your own? As far as I can tell, only Itachi-san was able to beat her, Kasama said solemnly, recalling many futile and painful spars with the Kunoichi. Of course, I beat the Sand Kid's ultimate defense, didn't I? Kasama reasoned that he had a point. What about the Kyuubi kid? Deidara laughed quietly. I won't make the same mistake twice, he says, a small grin on his face. Alright, I'm going to leave. Just don't say anything if Itachi-san screws at you for interfering with the mission. Kasama said, finally standing and retrieving his sword. Bet he gets his ass kicked, he thought with a grin, mentally planning to open a bet with Hidden and Kakuzu if he saw them, before disappearing in a splash of water. Deidara returned her gaze to the village, smiling at the upcoming battles. Whether it's the Hyuga, the Kyuubi, alternatively both, he'd win either way. Hinabi fired 2 quick jabs, and 2 more Naruto clones fell as they advanced on her. After more than an hour of sparring, there was still no clear winner. Another Naruto wave approached, with 2 leaping into the air, and the remaining 3 charging head first. Hinabi moved in and out, her feet never leaving the ground, gently planting hits to the vital points of each clone, resulting in a puff of smoke as they vanished. The two in the air released shuriken in quick succession, and Hinabi immediately went into the stance, her left arm loosely hanging and the other directed at the incoming attack. The air around her began to rush wildly as she focused her chakra into her palms, and she gave it the guidance her father taught her. "Chitin," she exclaimed, spinning and forming an impenetrable sphere that deflected the hail of blades hurled at her. Suddenly, she heard the ground crack beneath her feet, and another Naruto clone attempted to strike her in the same way that Neji was defeated a few years ago. She barely avoided it by jerking her head backwards at the last second and then recovering to quickly eliminate her foe. But she didn't realize it was a ruse. "Uzama," the trio said as three more clones burst from the ground, each planting a kick to Hinabi's midsection and launching her into the air. Another clone appears, adding a kai kick to send her flying across the ground. Her Byakugan allowed her to see a tree coming up behind her. She was able to spin in midair and regain her footing against the ground by focusing more of her chakra into her limbs, eventually skidding to a halt. She struggled to catch her breath, panting and pressing her hand against her chest. "Hinabi, you done already?" yelled a random Naruto clone, giving her a few moments of respite. Hinabi stood up straight and returned to her stance calmly. "Of course not," she said calmly before charging again, quickly dispatching three clones who intercepted her and catching an arm of a fourth and flinging him over her shoulder before leaping into the air and unleashing a dozen shuriken at the crowd below. The resulting poof sounds indicating her aim was accurate. When she landed, she saw a Naruto clone attempt to strike her from above, and she leapt aside to see the clone collide with the earth with a harsh crunch, effectively creating a small crater. Hinabi spun around, barely avoiding some kunai thrown at her, with more flying towards her. She focused the chakra once more and spun to create the protective sphere. It was the moment Naruto had been anticipating. A clone from above fed the original chakra into his palm and tossed him down towards the sphere, descending like a comet from above onto the lone Hyuga. Hinabi saw it coming but couldn't avoid it due to her defense, so she decided to confront it head-on, channeling the majority of her chakra into her ultimate defense. She allowed herself a brief thought as the small sphere of energy approached her. "Okami," she says before clenching her teeth. "Resengam," roared Naruto, thrusting his orb into the spinning field. As the sphere collided with hers, she felt the ground beneath her crack and break, and she exerted as much effort and energy as she could to keep the rotation going. As the two energies fought for dominance, chakra sparked and lashed out at its surroundings. The Hyuga's chitin was designed to withstand severe punishment, but even it had limits. Hinabi watched in terror as the sphere she was attempting to maintain buckled inwards, until it finally broke through, which was followed by the unstable defense producing a massive shockwave that sent her flying at incredible speeds towards the dense foliage, until she felt two arms wrap around her and collide into a mass of something surprisingly soft, and she gently drifted into sleep, barely able to keep her eyes open. She awoke to see Naruto's smiling face. It could have been because she was delirious or had a full-blown concussion, but he did look quite handsome at the time. "Hey, good to see you awake, Databao," Naruto said cheerfully. Looking around, she noticed she was on a bed with several flower pots scattered on various shelves. She leaned against her pillow, slightly raising her body. Due to her extreme exhaustion, she asked tiredly, "Am I in the hospital?" "No, Bachan would kill me if I did that." Naruto laughed, rubbing the back of his neck. "We're in Ino's folks' flower shop," he said, pointing with his thumb to the door through which Ino had popped her head. "Oh good, you're awake," exclaimed Ino as she walked to her bedside and sat down. "How are you feeling?" she inquired gently. "I'm tired, and my arm hurts," Hinabi said, looking at Naruto. "What did I exactly land on before falling unconscious?" she asked, recalling the mass that had saved her. "First you were grabbed by me, and we both landed on a huge pile of me," Naruto explained before returning his gaze to the young Hyuga, who wore a puzzled expression. "Clones," he clarified. "Oh," Hinabi said, finally making sense of the strange statement. Ino then looked at Naruto and felt a colossal killer intent slowly build before smacking the back of his head. "Yubaka, you were sparring with her," roared Ino as Naruto cowered visibly. "Ino-san, Naruto-kun was simply assisting me with my training as my father instructed him to," Hinabi said quickly before Ino, who was holding a chair above her head, continued to scream at him. "Yeah, what she said, Databao," he exclaimed, holding his arms to protect himself from the bloodthirsty female with the murderous furniture. Ino looked at each one before finally putting the chair down with a reasonable fine. Ino checked Hinabi's pulse and temperature as she returned her gaze. "Well, you seem fine. Wait an hour before leaving. Okay, Ino replied, ignoring Naruto for a moment before yanking his arm and leading him outside the store. Ino could finally say what she wanted with just the two of them. What's wrong with you? Ino gritted his teeth. Naruto smirked. Hey, you heard her. Her father gave me a job. I'm just doing what he wants. Naruto exclaimed, pointing her thumb in the shop. Ino sat with her arms crossed. Oh, I'm sure Hyuga-sama wants his daughter brought back dead, she joked, before realizing Naruto's face was filled with sadness and despair as he looked to the side. Yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't, he said bitterly, his eyes slightly closed in thought. Ino mentally kicked herself before gently placing her hand on Naruto's shoulder, causing him to look up. Look, I'm just saying be careful, no one can handle your crazy baka way of training. Ino laughed. Naruto smiled and raised his hands in surrender, saying, okay, I'll cool it slightly. Hey. Naruto and Ino turned to the left to see a Kamichi Choji run up to them, sweating profusely and hunched over with his hands on his knees, attempting to control his breathing. But his eyes were open and alert. Choji, what happened? Ino inquired, knowing full well when her teammate became concerned about anything. Choji panted before standing up straight. Shika was discovered in a coma. Yesterday, he's in the hospital, he said between breaths. Naruto and Ino's eyes widened and their mouths fell open. Ino, you go to Shikamaru, I need to drop off Hinabi, Naruto said solemnly, his gaze fixed on the remaining members of Team 10. Ino looked at him, finally snapping out of her stunned state. Of course, she said, her eyes glazed over. Naruto entered the flower shop, but his thoughts were racing. What in the world is going on? In the late afternoon of the village, the streets were as crowded as they could be. She noticed an odd couple walking by hand in hand or arm in arm, clearly having a good time despite the occasional laughs. She recalls her dog-like teammate asking her to accompany him a few times alone, only to be politely declined, leaving her teammate slightly disappointed and responding with a sigh of sadness and a fake cheerful "that's alright. I can just go with Akamaru" before walking away with his hand in his pockets. She also remembered hoping with all her young heart that a certain hyperactive blonde shinobi would notice her and invite her to stay for more than just ramen. She recognized this quiet street as the main food court of Konoha village, where villagers of all ages, from the eldest shinobi to the youngest genin, would frequent several times a week. A trio of young children ran past her, 2 boys and a girl, all laughing with the joy and exuberance that only children seem to have. She heard the girl yell "wait for me" at the 2 boys who appeared to be laughing at some private joke and turned the corner as they ran past. The girl appeared to lose her footing and trip on something unseen a few feet in front of the older woman. Reaching out her arm a little too quickly, she wrapped her right arm around the younger girl's back to catch her by the stomach, while the other caught her by the shoulder, saving her from a near accident. After regaining her balance, the young girl stood to straighten out her skirt, which had become creased from the fall and catch, and then looked the older woman in the eyes before bringing her hands together and bowing slightly. "Thank you, miss," she replied in a voice the older woman would describe as adorable. She had lost the ability to see things like that. She returned her gaze to the little girl, looking in the direction the boys had fled. "Go on now, you wouldn't want to be left behind," she replied calmly. The young girl looked at the road and began to walk before running at full speed before turning and saying, "Okay, thank you, bye." She could almost see a little girl with short dark hair and a white coat with a hood running with her friends to some assignment or meeting point with their sensei as she watched the little girl go. Apparently, the past and present were both full of small ironies. The two were strolling down a path on their way to the Hyuga mansion. Hinabi was well aware of how to judge when someone was a little uneasy, but Naruto's current state was blinding. She just couldn't stop herself. "What's wrong, Naruto-kun?" Hinabi inquired, concerned. With his trademark smirk, he looked at her. "No, it's nothing, I'm just worried about my friend, that's all," he says, returning his gaze to the path, his grin slightly fading. She nodded slowly, knowing full well that if someone close to Naruto was hurt or injured, he would move heaven and hell. "Oh yeah," Naruto exclaimed. Hinabi's reflection. "Can you tell Hyuga-sama that I won't be able to make it tomorrow because I have something to do?" he asked, scratching the back of his head. Hinabi gave him a shocked look before softening and turning away. "Of course," she said quietly. The couple arrived at the Hyuga compound just as dusk was falling, bathing the entire area in an orange hue that typified the family's rich and dignified image. When Naruto finally reached the front door and placed his hand on Hinabi's bare shoulder, she couldn't help but feel a little warm. "You did great today. Next time, I'm sure you'll really kick my ass, Databao," Naruto exclaimed. Hinabi laughed as she said her goodbyes and entered the compound. Looking back, Naruto was already sprinting toward the hospital. "He's far too stubborn," she thought, smiling. When he arrived at the hospital room where Shikamaru was being held, he found Team 10 and the casual form of 19-year-old Temari, who was dressed in a dark robe and had a red ribbon wrapped around her waist. Her hatae was wrapped around her brow, and her large fan lay beside her. They were sitting on benches outside, waiting for their friend's confirmation. They were unusually silent. "How is he?" Naruto inquired. "We don't know," Ino replied, shaking her head slowly. "His parents and Hokage-sama are in there right now," Choji said solemnly. "How did they find him?" Naruto inquired. Choji looked at his Ino, who returned his gaze before turning to face Naruto. "They discovered him in my family's flower shop," Ino explained quietly. "What?" Naruto exclaimed, surprised. "Then where were you?" he asked accusingly, Temari's gaze shifting to her. "Hey, I was at home," Ino exclaimed, surprised that they thought she would do anything to him. "Shikamaru has a set of keys to the place. So does Choji. He probably went inside to get something he forgot that morning or whatever, and then the guy got him. I had nothing to do with what happened to him," she insisted. "Ino, none of us are blaming you. Naruto just wondered where you were at the time to not get injured too. You do take care of the place a lot more than anyone in your family," Choji asked soothingly, looking at her with his calming smile. Naruto looked at San Kanoichi, who was still silently holding her fan on the bench, one leg over the other, staring at the ground with an expressionless face. "Are you all right?" Naruto inquired, sitting beside her. Temari raised her head, a frown forming on her brow, and said angrily, "I've been better." "I'm sure it's true." Temari's head snapped up at the blonde sitting next to her, the two of them staring daggers at each other. "Do you have anything to say?" Temari asked through gritted teeth. She had never liked this girl, even though she was on the same team as her boyfriend. "Oh, I'm sorry," I said. "Yeah, I bet," leaning forward. "Sorry if you couldn't hear me. It's probably your hairdo weighing your sand-clogged skull down." With a smile that was practically dripping enmity, Temari appeared unfazed. "Humph, as if. It's probably because of the self-centered, anorexic slut sitting in front of me," Temari said with a tone of pleasant boredom that her Shika would have undoubtedly approved of. "You're a bitch," Ino yelled before leaping off her bench and slamming her fist into Temari's face. Temari responded in kind, quickly getting up and punching Ino in the jaw. They were only a few feet apart before. Naruto was standing between them, quickly forming a cross with his arms and catching each fist with his hands, absorbing the force of each. The two girls were taken aback. They hadn't even noticed him get up from the bench. Choji, on the other hand, was quiet neutral. I wonder when Naruto could move like that," pulling a bag of bacon-flavored chips from a nearby bag and quietly munching on them. Naruto shattered his cross by moving his arms in opposite vertical movements before standing as a barrier between the enraged females who were still staring at each other with hatred. "Could you please calm down?" Naruto stated this while looking from one face to the other with a meaningful glare. Choji slowly stood up next to Naruto, still calmly munching on his bag of chips and looking at Ino, saying, "Come on Ino, let's go have lunch." "I'm not hungry," Ino growled, her gaze never leaving Temari's. "Then we can go get those new shoes you were complaining about yesterday, and then we can come check on Shikamaru," Choji continued casually, smiling. Ino's gaze shifted to his before returning to Suna Kanoichi. "Fine," she said as she turned and marched down the corridor. Choji approached Naruto and said quietly, "You owe me," with a small smile. "Ikaraku's, tonight, 7 p.m. You might be able to keep up with me this time round," Naruto said slyly. Choji's eyes sparkled with acceptance. "You're on," he said quietly but with utmost determination and confidence before following in his teammates' footsteps. Naruto returned his gaze to Temari, who was sitting in the same position as before. Naruto smiled and folded his arms. "Okay, let's try this again. Are you okay?" "To a point, Naruto-san," Temari replied, with a sigh. "I'm just wondering who could have beaten Shika this easily. Damn lazy ass. Knowing him, he probably went to get me something," she said angrily with a hint of sadness. The hospital door opened as Naruto nodded, followed by the Hokage and Shikamaru's parents. Temari jumped off her bench, and Naruto turned to face the newcomers. Yoshino, Shikamaru's mother, was on the verge of tears, and her husband had his hands on her shoulders, gently ushering her out. "How is he doing?" Temari inquired, her face flushed with concern. Tsunade gave the pair a solemn somber look before motioning behind her, her gaze fixed on Shikamaru's relatives. Temari smiled at Yoshino. "Yoshino-san, I think it's best you get some rest. Knowing your son, we'll see him sometime tomorrow evening," Temari said sarcastically. Yoshino actually let out a sad laugh. "Of course," she said before turning to leave and looking back at Temari. "Just so you know, dinner will be ready around 7:30, so don't push yourself with your work tonight, dear," she said before leaving with Shikamaru's father Shikaku, who turned and smiled at them. We'll see you later, okay? Yoshino's gesture was genuine because Temari was staying with them during her visit. When the parents finally left, the two looked at the Hokage. So, how exactly is he? Temari spoke quietly, as if Shikamaru's parents were still nearby. Tsunade sighed. Shikamaru is currently under the effect of a highly advanced genjutsu. Borderline S rank actually, she said calmly, and I wasn't able to synthesize an antidote or seal for it. Yet it's still slightly worrying. She thought by folding her arms. What do you mean, Bachan? Naruto asked, as if nothing had gone wrong. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. She wasn't in the mood to reprimand him right now, especially with a slightly perplexed Temari nearby, wondering what he meant. Well, from what I can see, the genjutsu was in the form of a parchment. And those are almost unheard of, except probably to that perverted Jiraiya. Any idea where he is, brat? She said with a slight smirk, knowing that would irritate him. No idea, Naruto said, a slight frown on his face after hearing her nickname for him. I've already sent some ANBU to search, so they should be here soon. Tsunade began, but right on cue, Tsunade was interrupted. Tsunade, yelled a relatively happy voice to her right. The three looked to their right and saw the legendary Toad Sage himself, a tall man with long spiky hair, a red robe, and a horned metal forehead protector. The trio couldn't help but notice his severe unbalance and near constant swaying, rosy cheeks, and blurred eyes as he strode towards them. Naruto could smell the massive amount of alcohol on his breath as he approached them, prompting Temari to cover her nose and back off slightly. He said, pointing with his pistol-shaped fingers, as if flirting with all three of them. A hawk-masked ANBU agent was taken aback and kneeled in front of the Hokage. I have completed my objective, Hokage-sama, he said respectfully. Tsunade shifted her gaze from the operative to Jiraiya, then back again. You couldn't have found him sober? She inquired, a little disappointed. Jiraiya-sama had already drunk 5 bottles of sake when I discovered him inside a questionable business establishment, and its waitress is Hokage-sama, the operative replied formally. Tsunade's eyes flashed at the Toad Sage, her brow twitching involuntarily. You are excused, the mission was a success, Tsunade told the operative, showing no signs of disappointment now, preferring to save it for the drunken idiot later. Thank you, Hokage-sama, the operative replied before disappearing without another word. Naruto decided it was time to whisper to Temari, motioning her to take a step back. Brace yourself, Naruto said ominously as Temari raised an eyebrow and looked at the impending apocalypse. Tsunade gave her old teammate a creepy smile, to which he responded with a slightly lopsided one. He said slowly, his fingers pointing like pistols. You perverted baka, Tsunade yelled, winding her fist and solidly connecting it with Jiraiya's stomach, forcing him to double over and expel all the air from his lungs, sending a shower of spittle flying out of his mouth, and forcing him to fall on the ground. Tsunade then continued to grab him by the collar and repeatedly punch him in the face, with minimal strength so as not to kill, but cause severe pain. I send you on a mission, and you go and get yourself in a brothel, you dumbass. She paused to drop him and then continued to brutally kick him in the ribs before grabbing his collar with both hands again and bringing his face close to hers. His face bruised and bloodied, he turned to her and garbled out "Wha happenin'?" he said drunkenly, as if unsure of where he was or why he was in such pain. That, of course, only fueled Tsunade's rage. Temari stood there, visibly terrified and terrified of the Konoha Hokage. She looked at Naruto, who seemed unaffected by the whole thing. Are they usually like this? She wondered. Naruto replied calmly, not really, she hasn't started staring him down with any furniture yet. Temari returned her gaze to the older pair, and it appeared that the weapon-related injuries were about to begin. Tsunade stopped mid-reach and looked at her. I do have pills to rejuvenate him if needed, she said with a smirk, but looking at Tsunade-kunoichi's face decided she could finish up later. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out a small glass jar of tiny blue glowing pills, and Temari looked on in awe. My own invention, chakra and physical regeneration pills, almost 10,000 times the strength of soldier pills with added effects, she said, shaking the small jar and smiling at Temari. Seriously difficult to make, and unfortunately even more difficult to mass produce, Tsunade said, opening the small vial and pulling out one as small as a pea. Temari could just hear the Hokage mutter, and I have to use one on this idiot. Grabbing the Toad Sage's throat and crushing it to open his mouth, before popping a pill in, letting go and forcing him to swallow it. Temari watched in awe as the horrific bruises seemed to deflate and slowly fade away, leaving him as good as new after the Hokage had beaten the daylights out of him. Jiraiya groaned from the ground and rubbed his head before standing up, apparently completely sober and awake but nonetheless massaging his skull, first looking at the two kids, then at his old teammate. "So, what do you require?" Jiraiya inquired, his mood somewhat gloomy, fully aware of his throbbing headache. Tsunade smiled at his agony before continuing. "A shinobi was hit by an advanced jinjutsu for which I have no antidote," Tsunade stated solemnly. Jiraiya raised his hand to his chin in thought before looking at the nearest hospital door, and then back. "Is it there?" Tsunade nodded, pointing his thumb, and the group entered. Temari's initial expression was one of sadness and confusion, having never seen such an effect and seeing the boy she cared for immobile, while Naruto's face was one of shock, not knowing his genius friend had ever been in such a state before. If you were outside, a bystander would tell you that the room was completely empty. Shikamaru was deathly quiet, his breaths barely audible with his eyes closed, dressed in his dark t-shirt and shorts. He looked like a corpse of someone who died in bed. The seal master approached the boy and leaned close, looking at different angles at his face and body. Temari and Naruto flinched as the seal master gently pulled an eyelid back, looking at his pupil. On closer inspection, it turned out to be a tiny set of seals, giving him an eerie appearance as though he was still watching them. Jiraiya seemed unaffected by the dark runes before him, looking at the odd spinning ring. That's new," he said almost to himself. Before looking at Tsunade, he stands up, places his hand on his hip, and points with his thumb. "Isn't this the Nara clan's brilliant shadow child?" Tsunade nodded as he asked sincerely and without sarcasm. Looking back at the boy and taking out a scroll and paintbrush before pausing, Tsunade watched with interest. "What's the problem?" Jiraiya sat on a nearby chair and scratched his chin, saying, "I have an idea what it is, but no real idea how to fix it." "What exactly is it?" Tsunade inquired. "Well, it has no definitive name, but I know the theory: a mental, physical, and emotional block in which the recipient's consciousness is locked inside, making their own mind part torture device, part prison," the boy said back. "Based on the person who did this, I'm sure he's seeing some pretty disturbing stuff right now." Jiraiya sighed sympathetically. "Help him instead of just sitting there." Temari screamed, her face contorted in sorrow and grief, tears streaming down her cheek. Naruto said nothing but nodded in sympathetic agreement. Jiraiya stood there unfazed, first looking at the kunoichi, then at his former student, before closing his eyes and sighing. "I'll do what I can, but it'll take some time," he said to his old teammate. "Can you lend me a sterile needle?" Tsunade looked perplexed for a moment before reaching inside her jacket and pulling a syringe and fresh needle out. "Nope, just the needle," Jiraiya said, pointing to the small piece of metal wrapped in plastic that Tsunade handed him, and he carefully unwrapped it and held it from opposing end to point and made a gesture as if to give it to someone. "Brat, leave," Jiraiya said to Temari, looking at him. "Could you please prick yourself?" Presenting it to Temari. "What in the world is going on?" Naruto inquired. Jiraiya gave his student another stern look, saying, "I said leave now." Waiting outside for 5 minutes before Temari emerged with a plaster on her forefinger, Naruto stood up and looked to her finger and then to her face before leaving. "What was the point of that?" Naruto inquired, completely unaware. Temari massaged her finger and looked up. "I'm not sure, something about it being used as a medium." Naruto remembered. "Do you mean something like a summoning technique?" Temari tapped her finger again. "Yeah, that's what I asked, but I've never heard of human summoning, other than reincarnation, which costs a life. And Shikamaru isn't dead, and neither am I," Temari stated quietly, but firmly. Naruto looked at her and thought of the most reasonable thing to say to her. "So, do you want some ramen?" Temari looked at him with a small grin forming. Her tears, though dry now, were still visible. "You're hitting on me, seriously." Naruto began to panic, and a blush appeared on his face. "Whoa, wait, I mean as friends." Hand up as if to stop her from thinking anything rash. Temari burst out laughing. "Naruto, Shikamaru, age 13, used to give me a harder time, but I have to decline. After all, I'm having dinner with the Naras," she said with a smile. "Oh yeah?" Naruto said, attempting to conceal his recent embarrassment and panic. Temari began to leave, saying, "See you around, Naruto, and Hokage-sama wants you to wait behind." Naruto looked perplexed, replying, "Sure, I guess." Temari finally waved, took her fan, and exited the corridor, leaving Naruto alone with his thoughts. Temari walked with a heavy heart outside, a few streets away. She used all of her strength to make her way to the Nara estate. She went down a road where no one could see her and discovered she couldn't walk, so she leaned against a nearby wall, tears streaming down her cheeks, before gathering her strength and repositioning her fan, moving as quickly as she could without looking anyone in the eyes. Only he was allowed to see her like this, which she despised. After 10 minutes, the door finally opened, and Tsunade motioned him inside. He saw his old sensei draw strange seals all over Shikamaru's face and body, linking to various scrolls, with a small red smear on his forehead that the seals all connected to, Naruto knowing exactly what that was and where it came from. Tsunade slammed the door shut behind her. "What's going on?" Naruto asks his friend, then the other two people in the room. They exchanged glances before turning to face him. "Well, when I first started doing this, there was a slight effect from him," Jiraiya explained. "There was? That's awesome, Databeo," Naruto exclaimed. Tsunade smiled slightly, and Jiraiya sighed and looked away for a second. He said ... well ... his shadow left an imprint of something, which we believe to be quite negative, Tsunade said quietly, slightly upset at having crushed Naruto's enthusiasm. Naruto having lost his smile and looking expectant for someone to strike the final blow. Tsunade reached behind her for a piece of paper and handed it to Naruto to examine. But he didn't seem to get it quiet right away, turning it around several times, looking at the image from both the front and back, upside down, before returning it to its original position. The two Sannin exchanged glances. Then Jiraiya shook his head and waved his hand in surrender to Tsunade, explaining the image. "Well, Naruto, it appears your friend is a genius beyond our comprehension. He was able to cast the image capture technique last second to preserve what he saw last. To tell us who did this to him," Tsunade said with a small laugh, reaching for the paper and adjusting it to show the image for what it was. Naruto squinted his eyes at the image, hoping to see better. His eyes widened slightly as he realized what had happened, and he looked around the room at the other conscious occupants. "Yes," Jiraiya said slowly, looking his students in the eyes. Looking back at the image, Naruto recognized it for what it was. It was as if someone had smeared black chalk on a piece of paper and attempted to draw a picture out of what was there. But Shikamaru seemed far more intelligent than even he gave him credit for. There was only one color he could see, a black cloak with gray clouds encircling it, and what appeared to be a straw hat on top covering the face. "They've arrived," Naruto said almost quietly. "Yes, Naruto," Tsunade said, as if hell was about to break loose. "The Akatsuki have taken over Konoha." "Well ... that was pointless," she thought. She was standing in a clearing deep within the Konoha forest. At her feet were random scattered bodies of a NBU. At least she thought they were a NBU and not rookies masquerading as Konoha elite. The bodies had no wounds, so there was no way of knowing what killed all 12 of them. "Humph, he wouldn't have died this easily ... we'd still be fighting and he'd be on the verge of killing me," she mused, her displeasure at shinobi's weakness regardless of their profession or numbers. She wondered, looking at each of the bodies, if they knew each other ... if they were friends ... if they grew up together. But she came to a halt as she observed the masks they wore with interest. Moving closer, she removed the mask, which appeared to belong to a slightly older girl, and examined it. It was distinct from the usual ANBU masks, which depicted animal shapes and had some degree of color, she discovered. These were all empty, except for the slight slits for eyes. The surface is completely blank. She remembered Itachi telling her that the ANBU was divided into several factions, and one such branch was known as Root, and it was led by an old Konoha shinobi named Danzo. They were apparently taught that the mission was everything, that they had no past, present, or future ... that the assignment they were given was everything. Looking back at the group, it appeared that they were all Root shinobi, and the areas she had discovered had been a Root training ground. They had no idea. "Fools, your past is what gives you meaning. You are taking advantage of your present. It is your future, where glorious salvation awaits." "WH," said a tiny voice behind her, coughing weakly. She took her time turning around. One was still alive, albeit barely. It was another Kunoichi, this time without her mask. She was struggling to even lift her head. She rose slightly and looked down at the dying Root Kunoichi, then up at the Akatsuki standing before her. The Root had just enough strength left to say a few words. "You're a Danzo-sama ... root ... will ... eliminate ... you ... hyuga ... she said weakly, enormously pale and sickly, looking up at her with dimming eyes. Akatsuki reached down, gripped the Root from the front, and lifted her one-handed upwards, her legs dragging behind her, placing her a few inches from her face. "Danzo has no idea I exist ... and even if he does, there is nothing he can do that will not result in another dull confrontation," she said evenly. The kunoichi examined the empty pits that constituted her eyes. You are misled all threats to konoha must be removed she yelled. Aside from myself, is there another threat? She inquired, slightly intrigued by the root's inner workings. The root coughed weakly, blood filling her throat and trickling down her chin as her life dwindled. Kai. The Akatsuki's eyes widened in rage, and she shattered the root kunoichi's shoulder bone from within. Grabbing the root kunoichi's shoulder with her free hand and focusing a little chakra in her thumb and forefinger, the Akatsuki let go of the shoulder, which was now a dark and purple color, and the root let out a weak scream of pain. We'll see, she said, looking to her left and flicking her forefinger, bringing a kunai to her hand from another fallen root, before returning her gaze to the one in her grasp and placing it at her throat. However, it appears you will not see it happen, she concluded, carefully moving the kunai across her neck. The root's eyes widened slightly, and her mouth opened briefly before closing. The Akatsuki, unconcerned about the fear on her face, threw herself harshly on the ground like a dead weight. She brought her blood-splattered, soaked hand closer to her face. She enjoyed the warmth it provided her. I was wondering if she could do it one more time before leaving Konoha.
So this was it for today. I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.